The very first section that we passed beneath.
Oh, that one?
Yep, and the brickwork just before the beams that support the buildings. The bridge ends here, but it was extended to accommodate more traffic. The road across here, mind your head Dylan, used to be part of the A2, which carries the traffic between London and Dover.
Okay.
Very busy road over a very old bridge.
All right.
Now since the 80s, early 80s, it's become pedestrianised, but it supports vehicles every morning for the deliveries, for the shops and the restaurants.
Oh, wow.
Very few vehicles, but it's enough to make that bridge technically one of the oldest bridges that still supports vehicles in the south of England.
Wow.
Look out for the exotic wildlife. Lots of
And that is
pigeons. Ducks.
duck is
Yeah.
there.
Okay, so the building that we've just passed beneath is called the East Bridge Hospital. It's a collection of architecture. It comes all the way around here. It was established in 1180. This wall behind the fence, the arched windows, that is part of the original architecture. The bit over the river has been extended in 1796. So the original building is all over here.
Before COVID, were people allowed to go inside and have a
Yes,
look?
exactly. Hopefully it'll be open again at some point in the near future,
Okay.
but just not yet. It's named a hospital. It has never been a medical facility. The word hospital was more simply associated with hospitality. So this was literally somewhere to stay. It was set up specifically for the pilgrims. They came to visit the shrine of Thomas Becket within the cathedral. If they had no money, they could stay here for one night free of charge. Which is a good example of how Canterbury has changed. Now, two left from a family of 11. Mortality rate is quite high along the channel of water.
This river gets deeper.
It gets deeper further down. The further up we go, it gets shallower. Almost 2 meters down at the other end. But you'll see how shallow it gets as we go upstream. If it was nice and clear, you might see some fish. Do any of you know the name of the river that we have running through Canterbury? No? This is called the River Stour. S-T-O-U-R. There are, I think, 5 or 6 different rivers in Britain with the same name. The word Stour finds its origins as an Anglo-Saxon word that meant fast or angry flowing water. Of course, it's not.
It's quite still.
It's not fast or angry today, which is good for me.
Yeah.
There is a good reason, though. When the river reaches Canterbury, it's divided into different channels.
Okay.
The original course travels outside the city through the Westgate Gardens. This is all a canal. This was all dug out to solve flooding problems.
Okay.
And because it runs through the city centre, it's very carefully controlled by floodgates. We'll see them later in the tour, further downstream. But for most of the year, those gates are closed. So the water we're on is slow because it's being held back. But when there's a lot of rain, the water rises, you can open the gates, the level is consistent. And the speed is what changes.
So it gets hard for you to row back, is it?
Sorry?
It gets hard for you to row the boat back.
Yeah, exactly. Now mind your heads. Already been worn away over the years by the back of boatmen's heads. Still bits of hair stuck to the brickwork. wall behind me is the end of a small island. It's called the Greyfriars or the Franciscan Island.
All right.
Now the Franciscans were followers of Saint Francis of Assisi. Assisi in Italy, St. Francis, the patron saint of birds and animals, also well known for his strict vows of poverty. So the Franciscans, they were called Greyfriars. They didn't always wear grey. They just wore very plain, undyed fabric. So the lighter robes would probably have been brown, but of course the heavy robes, undyed wool, typically is quite grey. So this is how they got their name. 9 Franciscans first ever came to the shores of Britain in the year 1224. They arrived near Dover. They explained that they were men of God making their way to Canterbury. And then it is said that they were arrested.
Okay.
They didn't look as people thought clergy should look. They would have, they're governed by vows of poverty. They travelled halfway across Europe. They probably looked more like vagrants when they arrived. So suspicion was there about who they were. So they were taken before a judge to account for themselves. Now in front of the judge, it is said that one of the friars took the rope from his robe. He held it up, declaring, "If you find us to be criminals, here is the rope with which you must hang us." It's a bold move.
Yeah.
Now, apparently the judge was very impressed with this. They clearly had no fear of death. They must be fully confident of their place in heaven. They must be the men of God that they're claiming to be. So on the strength of this, it is said that they were set free to conclude their journey here in Canterbury. It's a nice story.
Yeah.
They were given permission to settle on this piece of land, where they constructed their first Franciscan priory in Britain. It consisted of only 3 buildings, very small settlement. And
Can people go see it? Like,
it's
outside?
all governed by the Eastbridge Hospital, so
Oh, okay.
unfortunately, until they reopen, I think they're going to keep all of this closed as well. Typically, yes. Typically, it would be possible to get onto the island, and I'd recommend it if you were able to, because it's a very peaceful, beautiful part of the city. And it has the one building up here, you can see, this is a chapel. The reason there's only one building left is because of the changes made to the church here in England in the 16th century by King Henry VIII. Because he wanted to be the head of his own church for a number of reasons, mainly because he wanted to get the British. Catholics were driven out. The Franciscan priory was abandoned. The building materials were taken away, but for this one building, and it is believed that this, rather than being torn down, was maintained because it's built. Useful building. It's one of the access points of the island. On the luckiest side, it is now the oldest example of architecture associated with the Franciscans anywhere in Britain, dating back specifically to the year 1267. The Cathedral Archives have it written as a guest house, so it's probably that's its earliest purpose, but today it is a building that contains a chapel. We've got some Franciscans today that worship inside that building. They keep the island looking nice, hopefully for the visitors that should be coming back when it's open. When you're back on the high street, the building opposite the Weavers, that is the building through which you would go. There might be some information in the window. I haven't checked recently, so if you wanted to find out, there might be some information there.
Okay.
This is where we begin our journey to the other side of Canterbury. No more old buildings for us in this direction. It's going to take you all the way down to the floodgates that I mentioned earlier.
Those are the floodgates, yeah?
Floodgates are downstream.
That way. What's there?
That just goes further up past the back of some shops, then past the back of a number of houses, and then eventually out into the countryside on the way up towards the next village. There used to be a tannery up there where they would cure animal hide for making leather and things like that. That was the only building of historic consequence, and that's been fully torn down. It's no longer there. The whole site has been redeveloped into luxury apartments, which is way of things, modernising the canals and what have you. Of course, it's another example of what this canal would have been used for, though. With industry like that, all of the waste from it would have been chucked in the water, along with all of the city's sewage. And thankfully, we have a lot more regard for our rivers and waterways than we used to. So it is very, very clean. Doing a river tour a couple of hundred years ago would have been a very inadvisable experience, I think.
Yeah.
We do have lots of fish. We've got trout, roach, bream, dace, perch, chub, freshwater eels, minnows, sticklebacks, crayfish, pike. The trouble is, the best... Sorry?
I don't see any fish.
No, this is the thing. The first tour of the day is the best tour to see fish on, because if you imagine, if you're a little fish in here, you've got these big boats going up and down, you're going to find somewhere else to go. So after the first couple of tours, it looks like there are no fish, because they've all gone elsewhere, but they... Ahoy! Oh, I'll get out of your way. Oh, you come through. John, feel free to get the fires. No worries, it's all good.
What?
Awful chap.
Oh no, horrendous, the worst. Absolute worst.
Okay. Yeah, mind your heads. Look out for the wooden beams, the pigeons, live upon them. There we go. Bridge. Okay, now the next part of our tour is the old weaver's house, AD 1500. Architecturally, that date is pretty accurate. Everything you can see on the outside, though, is a more recent addition. It's a false Tudor facade on a genuine Tudor building, put there by the Victorians to make it look more interesting. The earliest photos of this building are the same shape, but a much simpler, none of this panelling, much simpler building. But the Victorians like to dress up their old buildings, make them look a bit fancy. Now this place became known as the Weavers because of the textile industry that was brought to England during the 16th and 17th centuries by people called Huguenots. They were Protestants. They were escaping their own religious turmoil in France and parts of Belgium. Very industrious people.
Isn't Protestant same as Church of England now?
It's like the Anglican Church finds its roots in the Protestant thing, but yeah, the Church of England is now the Anglican Church. But so it's slightly separate, but it's more akin to Protestant than it is to Catholic.
Okay, and then the Canterbury Cathedral, what is the origin of that?
Well, that was, of course, Catholic for a very long time, and
Yeah.
and then under, of course, the changes made by Henry VIII.
And then it came
It
Church
was a
of England.
Protestant place, which is why Elizabeth I granted these people sanctuary, and also gave them a French language chapel within the cathedral as well. And then, of course, over the years it has become the heart of the Anglican Church, the Church of England, which, as I say, finds its roots in Protestantism, but has become a slightly different thing.
Does people live in this house? No.
This is Pizza Express.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
It's a good question because it has been a private residence for a while. It was originally built in the 17th century as the city's forge, so another example of the industry. It was where they would make all the tools and weapons and do the metal. It was also used as a repair shop for stained glass windows at one point. But yeah, literally in the early part of the 20th century, I believe it was a private residence. It looks like a lovely place to live. I quite like a place like that. I've been inside, it's a lovely old building. But yeah, now it's a restaurant. Many of the old buildings in the city have either become restaurants or cafes.
What is that?
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Oh,
I find it's going to get steadily windier throughout the day.
yes,
Yeah,
that's
that's
it forward
really
to. So,
Yeah, have you got your sail ready?
sails out, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Or umbrellas, you can use as substitutes. This face is a big sculpture that was commissioned for the theatre, the previous version of the theatre. It's titled Bulkhead, and it's meant to be the face of Helen of Troy.
All right.
The face that launched 1,000 ships is made of 1,000 bits of metal. Of course, the term bulkhead is the name for the front of a ship as well. So, yeah. I don't know the artist's name. Nice bit of art. Distracting from the strong modern lines of the theatre itself. We've got two more lovely old buildings flanking the canal here though. Nice old ones. This one, you'll notice some very weird things out here. This is the arts department of children's school, so that's why there's some strange things out here. But yeah, these two buildings were once the name of another priory, and these were the Dominican priory. So you've got the Franciscans, the Grey Friars, who wore brown. The Dominicans, they became well known as the Black Friars. They wore the black cappers. Followers of San Dominic of Spain. Not quite so strictly governed by vows of poverty. They were able to accumulate money in the name of God, which is nice. Henry III was on the throne when they arrived in 1236. He was a strong supporter of the Dominicans. So he gifted them £500 from the royal treasury, wood from the royal forest with which to build, the materials and help. So they were able to establish some very large and impressive priories across the south of England. This one in Canterbury was finished, when it was finished, consisted of 11 buildings.
How many left now?
Only these two. Despite their wealth, despite their power, they were of course Catholic, and they were quite high on the agenda for Henry VIII to send his men to go and visit them. They were driven out under threat of death. Their priories plundered and actively destroyed. This one included, with the exception of these two buildings, which may have been spared for a couple of reasons. First of all, and I believe this is more speculation, neither of them actually had any religious purpose. This was their refectory, where they ate their food. This was their dormitory, where they slept. The fact that they had no religious use might have lent itself to their survival. But I think what really secured their survival is that somebody wanted to buy them. So, of course, coin speaks louder than a lot of other things, and they were sold
All right.
instead of being torn down. Dominicans, they weren't the friendliest of people either. They became quite well known for the role that they played in the Spanish Inquisition. So they became enforcers of the word of God, heretic hunters. If you were accused of crimes against the church, your inquisitor that had come banging on your door was probably chosen from the Dominican order. So not the friendliest of reputations, but they did a lot of good for the communities that they settled in as well, in an unexpected way. They did a lot of good by introducing to the city huge amounts of beer, cider, things like that. It was low in alcohol, small beer particularly, and everybody was encouraged to drink it, literally, man, woman and child. It was around 1%, so very low in alcohol. It's very nourishing, so you could get full before you could get are the floodgates. Let's get you in a little closer. They're very important and they're very simple. If we can release water from this side, the buildings are safe. The level on the other side, you'll notice as we get closer, it's more than 2 meters lower than it is here. So we can always release the extra water as necessary. They consist of 6 big iron plates that run into the riverbed. They get taken up every winter, which transforms this into a very shallow, very rapid rush of water. When we take the boat, the smaller ones can be looking back and what you're looking at is a very good example of Victorian engineering. These gates were installed in 1829 and they have been in fairly constant use ever since.
And it's still working.
Still working, more than almost 200 years on.
Is there kind of a lever to lift them up? Or?
There's a big crank. The guy comes down
Oh, really?
and he wedges it in there and you literally crank the whole thing up.
The whole thing, is it?
First of all, you open the little panels and hook out the top plates.
Okay.
But you can see there are 6 kind of devices along the top. These are the cranks, and the lever is kept somewhere else because, of course, other people.
Yeah.
That's big
Right.
gadget.
So, yeah, exactly. Now, as I say, the gates were installed in 1829. There was a more obvious reason for them to be here when they were built, because there was also an enormous water-powered mill stood across the end of this channel. 6 full levels high, our second largest building in the city, and it had a room the size of a living room on top of that. The Abbott's Mill was here to deliver power.
Oh, there is where the
Where these metal pillars are, yeah. They would have been part of the structure.
to hold the
Now, the original version of power was part of the reason burning was very difficult to control, and this mill was constructed almost entirely of wood. Probably guess where this story is headed. A combination of factors that amounted to a big burning problem when the mill caught fire on the 17th of October 1933. The firemen arrived quickly, they had loads of water to use. The fire was ferocious, they couldn't get it under control. The part of the mill collapsed onto the roof of the miller's arms. It set fire to the roof of the pub. Now the firemen at this point decided it was time to focus their efforts on saving the pub, cut their losses with the mill. Because the pub is connected to 2 rows of houses. One row leads into the city centre, the other row leads towards the back of the building. I like to imagine that the firemen were rewarded appropriately for their efforts by a grateful landlord. I mean, firefighting is kind of fantastic work, isn't it? They did save the pub. There are paintings in there of what the old mill used to look like. Photos of the old mill we found in the yeah, 2 rusted pillars, that's all that remain of the mill. The house on the end, incidentally, built in the 1960s, that's an architect's tribute to the mill.
that modern house.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
It's an architectural celebration of the Abbott's Mill. It looks nothing like the Abbott's Mill, but it's an interesting bit of architecture in its own way.